Good morning, everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Today, we're going to be talking about something that sounds really simple, but it's actually pretty complex when you think about it. Leadership is pretty easy when you don't have people around you, right? So, we're going to talk today about what great leaders actually do. It's not about what they believe, not about what they say they value, but what they consistently do in their day-to-day leadership. Because the reality is that most leadership advice sounds really good, but it's actually hard to apply. So today, I really want you to walk away with something that's practical, clear, and immediately usable. By the end of this session, I really want you to know the 5 specific behaviors that we can use right away, a simple way to evaluate your leadership, and one action that you can take this week. But before we start, what I really want to know is how is everyone doing today? On a scale of I am so drained to I am excited and ready to go, how are you doing today? You can put it in the chat. Need some sunshine. I completely agree. In the middle, fantastic. Great. Great. Meh. Yeah, Kimmy, I'm there some days, huh? I'm good today. Wonderful. I'm kind of like I'm excited and ready to go, but I'm kind of ready. It's Wednesday, right? It's a Wednesday. Especially when printers don't work at the very beginning of the morning. It's great. All right. So I want to start off today with a quick poll. And this one is just something that I want you to quick put in the chat. What makes someone a great leader? Is it someone who inspires others? They get the results, they build strong teams, communicate clearly, maybe something else. Yep. Build strong teams, inspire others, leading by example, build strong teams. Yeah. Communicate clearly. Yeah. So, what I want to notice here is that we've got a lot of, communicating clearly, getting the results, they're building strong teams, communication. Yeah. All of the above, right? All of these are right. So, most people think that a great leader is someone who exhibits all of these things. But it's really hard to clearly explain how great leaders actually do these things. And that's where we're going to go today. Um, we are going to use a polling. Uh, it's called Slido. And this is the joining slide. You'll also have a QR code on every polling that we use. But if you do join at slido.com, I don't know why it separates the 9 and the 3. This is their joining slide, and they do that. It does not have a space between it. So if you're joining online, don't put the space between it. All right. So when we talk about leadership, there's a problem with it. When we talk about leadership advice, because it kind of falls into these 3 categories. It's often vague, it's idealistic, or it's hard to apply. So we hear things like be inspiring, empower your team, you got to build trust with them. And those all sound really great. But what does that actually look like on a Wednesday afternoon when your team is overwhelmed, the printer stopped working, you're under pressure, and decisions need to be made quickly? Well, that gap between knowing what you should do and actually doing it is where leaders get stuck. So here's the shift that I want to make. Great leadership is about those consistent behaviors that you show. It's not just your personality. So, across research from Brene Brown, Liz Wiseman, Adam Grant, we see the same pattern, right? That great leaders aren't necessarily the most charismatic, but they're the most intentional about how they're acting with their team. So they've built habits in how they respond to their team, how they communicate with their team, and how they are leading others. And that's really good news because behaviors can be learned. It's not just our personality. So today we're going to really focus on 5 things that great leaders consistently do. They create psychological safety, they multiply others, They build growth cultures. They focus early on what matters, and they lead beyond themselves. These are not just theories that we're going to talk about. These are actual behaviors that you can apply. So let's start by the one of the most important ones. This is foundational. Create psychological safety. And I want to point out here that psychological safety is often misunderstood as just being nice or easygoing, and that's not it. Psychological safety is about how much risk people feel when they speak up around you. So every time someone shares an idea, they're asking a question, they disagree with you, or they're admitting a mistake, they're taking a risk. And in that moment, their subconscious is asking themselves, is it actually safe here? Like, is this something that I can do? And the part that matters the most in this is that your response teaches them that answer. It's not your intention behind how you answer. It's not the values that you have. It's your response. So this idea really shows up a lot in the work of Brene Brown around vulnerability and trust. Amy Edmondson is another good one that teaches about psychological safety. But Brene Brown really talks about how leaders set the tone by what they're willing to model. And so what I've seen and experienced is that this is not about those small or those big moments. It's really about the small everyday moments that matter, those responses from everyday things that are happening. So let's make this practical. What do great leaders do? Well, they admit their mistakes. They ask for input and they respond without shutting people down. And here's where leaders kind of get tripped up because it's not in those big moments. It's in those small, quick reactions. So we're talking about the facial expressions that you have, the tone that you're saying it with, yeah, but those micro moments either open the door or they close it to psychological safety. And most leaders don't even realize that they're closing that door. And I want to point out that people are always watching how you respond. So one question that our team really loves is how do you want people to experience you? That is part of this. How do you want your team to experience you when you're trying to create that psychological safety? So here's a poll that we're going to do. In meetings, what tends to happen most? Are there just a few people that do most of the talking? Do people share when they're only confident? Is there a mix of voices? Or does it depend on the meeting? There's a mix of voices. That's really good. A few people do most of the talking. It depends on the meeting. Yeah. So looking at this, most teams kind of fall into a pattern, right? It's either a few voices are dominating, maybe, or people wait until they're sure because it kind of depends on the meeting. And that's exactly where psychological safety shows up. Because participation isn't always just about the personality of the person that's talking, but it's about that environment that is created that they feel safe enough to share their opinions, to share their disagreements, maybe push back. So we're going to talk about multiplying others, and this really comes from the concept from Liz Wiseman in her book Multipliers. And it's one of the most practical shifts that I think you can make as a leader. When we're talking about multipliers, we're not just talking about leading people, but you're actually expanding their capacity and their capability that they have. So we're going to be talking about multipliers versus diminishers. Multipliers are those that believe that people are capable. You just need to draw it out of them, right? And diminishers believe that I need to step in to make sure that this goes well because I'm the one that makes sure that everything is perfect. So let's look at what this actually looks like in action. We're going to start with multipliers. So multipliers are those, remember that they believe that everybody is capable. They grow that capacity. They're using people's intelligence. They ask questions. They stretch people to, they may not know how to do it right now, but they're going to make sure that that person is learning and growing. They use others' ideas and they build that capacity. And then diminishers, well, they often unintentionally do the opposite of that. So they're giving all the answers, they're criticizing, they're controlling all the decisions, and they take credit. Even if the whole team was involved, they are the smartest person in the room, so they are going to be the one that takes credit. And I do want to point out that a lot of the times we unintentionally become diminishers because we're trying to be helpful and we're trying to be efficient. We know that if we just do it, it's going to be faster. One thing that we can really do is ask before you answer. And this sounds simple, and I'm going to explain it a little bit more because you're probably thinking, what in the world am I asking? Well, we're not just asking these generic, random questions, how was your day? That's not what we're asking. We are asking clarifying questions. So, walk me through what you're seeing. What have you tried so far? Ask problem-solving questions. What do you think we should do? What options do you see? And we're asking expansion questions. So, we're trying to push their thinking further. What else could we consider? What might we be missing? And also ownership questions, because that is a task that they should be owning, right? It's not just something that they get stuck and it automatically becomes our problem. So we're creating that accountability and also confidence. So, what's your next step? What would you do to move this forward? And I know that whenever you start doing this and you're not just automatically taking on the task, it's going to be kind of awkward at first because people are going to hesitate. They aren't used to you doing that. They're not used to you asking them questions back. They're a lot of the times used to coming to you with a problem and you just take it on, and that is there. That's that. And then it's not their problem anymore. But we want to create that ownership. So we are going to start asking those questions. And if you stay consistent, then they are going to start showing up differently. So when someone comes to you with a question, what usually happens? Is it you give them an answer or direction? You ask a few questions first. We talk through it together. It depends on the situation. Ask a few questions first. Yeah. Walk through it together. It depends on the situation. I love that we're asking questions and we're talking through it together. Depends on the situation. I give them an answer. Yeah. So this is honestly exactly what I would think we would see is that most of the time we fall into maybe we give them the answer or it depends, or I'm really glad I'm seeing that we're talking through it together. We're asking those questions. And here's why that matters. Because even if your intention is to help, if your default is answering, you are training your team to come to you instead of to think for themselves. So, as much as we want to be helpful, we just need to think about how can we actually empower our team. So, building a culture of growth, this is coming from Mary Murphy's work on cultures of growth. And what she found is that the environment that leaders create actually shapes how people show up. So, this idea of culture growth versus performance culture is one of the most important distinctions, really, in leadership right now. So, culture is not what you say, it's actually what people experience repeatedly. You can have values on the wall, but if you're not actually living those, then it's not the culture that you're trying to build. We have performance cultures where people really feel evaluated. So they're protecting themselves, they're avoiding that risk, They're staying quiet when they're unsure. But in growth cultures, people are feeling developed. They're contributing earlier. They're taking ownership. They're engaging more fully. And here's the key, right? Is that leaders don't just declare that they have this culture. They actually create it through the patterns and the consistent behaviors. So Mary Murphy's research really shows that people thrive when leaders create those growth cultures and not performance cultures. People in performance cultures play it safe, and people in growth cultures take ownership. But let's talk about performance culture for a little bit. They feel like they have to prove themselves. So they are avoiding the mistakes. They're not trying new things because they don't want to be wrong. They're playing it safe. They're protecting their image. They're using others' ideas because they don't want the idea to come back to them if it fails. But in a growth culture, people are focusing on improving. They are learning openly, they're engaging more, they're taking ownership, they're trying new things. And you really create this culture, the performance culture versus the growth culture, and how you respond to failure. I completely think that this book is amazing and everybody should have it. So let's make this a little real right now. And what do great leaders do? It's not in those mission statements. It's not in those values on the wall. Yes, those are great, but it's remember about those consistent behaviors. So they normalize learning. They normalize people making mistakes. When something doesn't go as planned, well, that moment defines your culture more than anything else. They ask before they're blaming. So they're asking questions to really get to the problem before they really are blaming without knowing what was going on. And they focus on improvement. So instead of asking, well, what happened? Maybe we can ask, what can we learn from this? Instead of, who missed this? Ask, where did the process break down that we can really refine that? Let's walk through how we improve this for next time. And those small shifts to failure really completely change how people will show up. I want you to reflect on this. Where does your team lean right now? You don't have to put it in the chat, but I want you to really reflect on this because this is important. It's not thinking, well, this is where I want to be. I want to be in the growth culture, but it's about what people actually are experiencing on your team. Because here's the reality of this. You don't have to ask people what culture you have. You can actually observe it. Our team can come into your team and immediately know, after just spending a few minutes with your team, what your culture is. So think about that. Where does your team lean? So now we're going to focus early on what matters. And this is coming from the book uh, by Michael Watkins, and it's in the first 90 days. I also think that this is a great book. And he emphasizes that early focus and clarity are what drive momentum. And this is where a lot of strong leaders unintentionally create that confusion because they care a lot about a lot of things, right? And when everything feels important, everything gets attention, well, nothing actually gets traction to take off and really get finished correctly. We have great leaders that don't just manage work, but they create that clarity. That is the most important, creating that clarity. So, what do great leaders do whenever we're focusing early on what matters? Well, they do three things really well. They diagnose before acting. So, they're not jumping to conclusions before you understand the problem. This goes back to, they ask before blaming, right? What do most leaders do before they diagnose before acting? Well, they hear part of the issue or they assume that they understand and they immediately offer a solution. And what that leads to is that it's a feeling of being efficient, but it often misses the real issue of what's happening because they don't have the full picture. Great leaders clarify priorities. They make it clear what matters most right now. What most leaders do is that they say everything is important. They add priorities without removing others. And yes, I do know that things have to get done, whether it is something, you know, that's on the bottom of the list, got it. But we have to make sure that we are making sure that our team knows what is number one on the priority list. Don't just keep adding it and say everything's important. You have to make sure that they know what's the most important right now. A lot of the times we also assume that people know what matters. And that creates a feeling of overwhelm and a scattered effort because nobody's knowing what is actually important right now. So great leaders clarify those priorities and they build quick wins. So we create early progress that builds that confidence and that momentum. What do most leaders do? Well, they focus on the big outcomes. They wait too long for results, so it's kind of stalling, right? Or they overcomplicate the execution of the tasks. And this can lead to frustration and those that stalled energy. Great leaders also lead beyond themselves. So this is a concept by Adam Grant, and he talks about this, and it's about how you should tie your success to the success of others, not just your own outcomes. This is also where leadership shifts from managing to multiplying impact. Because at some point, leadership is no longer about what you can do. It's about how you build others. It's about how capable your team is. What, uh, what capacity does your team have? Have you built that up? And it's also about the culture that you have allowed to be created on your team. So what does this look like? Well, this shows up in pretty tangible ways. You share credit, even when you could take it. Nobody would blame you, but you're sharing credit with your team. You are developing others. A lot of the times, it may not be as fast as you want it to be, but you're allowing your team to be growing. You're allowing your team to have that growth culture. And you're building future leaders. You create those opportunities for people to really step up. And here's the shift that I want you to notice is that in this, you stop being the center of everything. You don't need to be involved in every single aspect that's going on in your team. Yes, you should know about it, but you don't have to be the decision maker on everything. And you also start growing something that is beyond you, right? Your success is measured by who you elevate. So it's not just about what you accomplish. It's about, you know, your impact. Over time, your results fade. Not everybody's going to remember what you accomplished, but they will remember your impact on the people that you were around. They will remember how you treated them. They will remember the culture that was created in your leadership. How did you help your team grow? What did you do to build the capacity and the capability of those on your team? So I really want to bring this together. Remember that these are the 5 behaviors. Create psychological safety, multiply others, build growth cultures, focus early on what matters, and lead beyond yourselves. And these 5 behaviors sound really complex, but when you break it down, they're all about being intentional. And that is the difference. Being intentional, being an intentional leader. Because leadership doesn't improve just by being aware of these topics, but it improves through that consistent behavior. Which of these 5 will have the biggest impact on your team if you focus on it this week? Is it creating psychological safety, multiplying others, building that growth culture, focus early on what matters, or lead beyond yourself. Psychological safety, building growth culture, multiply others, focus on what matters, building growth culture. Yeah. And I would say, don't try to do all of these at once. Focus on those intentional behaviors that you really want to show up with your team this week. Awesome. So I want to leave you with this. Leadership is not what you intend. It's what you consistently do. Your team does not experience your intentions behind the behavior. They experience your patterns. So the question becomes, what pattern are you creating? How is your team experiencing you? How do you want your team to experience you? So, I want to thank you for your time today and for your engagement. My hope is that you're leaving with, really some things that you can change or some habits that you can make. Remember that leadership doesn't change in those big moments. It's really those small, consistent shifts. And those shifts over time really create that real impact. I would love for you to scan that QR code and give me some feedback, and I'd love to stay connected. I will be sending out this recording, and yeah, I hope to see y'all next time.